Most people live their entire lives on the surface of existence. They become so entangled in roles, routines, identities, and the relentless pursuit of external validation that they never pause to question what lies beneath it all. From the moment they wake up, their minds are already chasing the next thing, tasks, responsibilities, achievements, and the endless noise of what's next. Life becomes a race from one moment to another, from one goal to the next, always seeking, never arriving. This surface-level living creates a certain hollowness. It's not always immediately noticeable because it's often masked by temporary highs, success, material gains, recognition, distractions. But underneath it all, there's a quiet discomfort, a subtle sense that something is missing. It's like decorating a room beautifully without ever noticing that the foundation is weak. And over time, the cracks begin to show. You start to feel it during the quiet moments when the distractions fade and the mental noise grows louder. That discomfort, that emptiness, isn't a sign of failure. It's a signal. It's life calling you to go deeper. Depth doesn't come from adding more to your life, more possessions, more achievements, more validation from others. That only increases the surface. Depth begins the moment you become still enough to feel what's already here, but overlooked. It's not about acquiring more knowledge or piling up experiences. It's about shedding the unnecessary, the inauthentic, the things that do not belong to the essence of who you truly are. You may notice that your entire sense of identity has been built upon things that are fleeting: your job, your relationship, your status, your appearance, your beliefs. These things are not wrong in themselves, but when they become the foundation of who you think you are, they limit you. They form a shallow layer around your being, and you end up mistaking the wrapping for the gift inside. That is how the ego operates, by attaching itself to form, to labels, to temporary structures, and saying, "This is me." But the truth is, you are not those things. You are not your achievements, your possessions, your roles. Who you are is far deeper than anything that can be defined, categorized, or measured. And when you begin to sense this, when you become aware of that inner stillness that exists beyond thought, you start to feel a shift. Suddenly, the surface loses its grip on you. The need to constantly chase, to prove, to strive, it begins to dissolve. This doesn't mean you abandon your responsibilities or disengage from life. Quite the opposite. You begin to engage more fully, but from a different place, a place of presence, not of ego. The doing remains, but now it is no longer driven by lack. You are no longer using activity to cover up an inner void, because the void has been seen for what it truly is, an invitation into being. Surface living is like skating across ice. You may move quickly, cover a lot of ground, even perform a few tricks, but you never touch the depths of the lake beneath. And at some point you begin to crave that depth. You sense that life has more to offer than mere movement. You feel an inner pull to slow down, to look inward, to ask, is this all there is? And that question, sincere and honest, is the beginning of awakening. So much of the suffering in the world stems from this shallow existence. People try to fill the gap with more things, more noise, more drama, more stimulation, but none of it satisfies. The momentary pleasure quickly fades, and the chase begins again. But what if the answer isn't out there? What if it's not something you can acquire, but something you return to? When you stop identifying so strongly with the surface, with thoughts, emotions, outcomes, you begin to feel space inside you. You discover an awareness that is not dependent on circumstances. And in that awareness, depth begins to open, not as a concept, not as a philosophy, but as a direct experience. You realize you don't have to add anything to yourself to be whole. You already are. This is where presence comes in. The present moment is the entry point to depth. It's the doorway, but most people miss it because their attention is constantly pulled into past and future, into memories, regrets, hopes, fears. They are never truly here, never fully present. And without presence, depth is impossible. You remain trapped on the surface, like a leaf drifting on water, never sensing the stillness of the depths below. Once you recognize this, the whole dynamic of your life begins to change. The obsession with doing softens. The craving for external validation loses its intensity. You start to notice the beauty in simple things, the feeling of your breath, the stillness of a morning, the aliveness in your body. These moments don't impress the ego, but they nourish the soul. They reconnect you with what is real, what is timeless. Depth is not dramatic, it is not loud, it is quiet, spacious, and subtle. It doesn't seek attention, but it transforms everything it touches. A shallow life may seem full from the outside, but it often feels empty within. A A deep life, on the other hand, may appear simple, but it contains a richness that no amount of external success can replicate. If you're feeling the weight of surface living, the exhaustion, the dissatisfaction, the sense that something vital is missing, that awareness itself is the first step. Don't try to escape it. Stay with it. Allow it. That discomfort is not a problem, it's an invitation to stop running and start listening, to drop beneath the surface and rediscover what has always been there, patiently waiting. And when you touch that place, even briefly, you'll know, not because something dramatic happens, but because something quiet arises, a sense of peace, of aliveness, of coming home. There comes a point in your life when the constant movement, the inner restlessness, and the never-ending search no longer fulfill you. The mind is always reaching into the future for the next goal, into the past for identity, into others for validation. And yet, despite all this striving, something fundamental remains untouched, unresolved, a quiet sense that none of it leads to real peace. It's in those moments when the external loses its power to distract you that something deeper begins to stir within. That stirring is the call to stillness. Stillness is not the absence of movement or noise in your environment. It is the absence of compulsive movement within. The inner chattering, the constant interpreting, judging, comparing. Most people have never truly experienced stillness because they are always lost in thought. The moment one thought ends, another begins. Even in rest, the mind races. Even in quiet, the inner noise continues. So they never discover the space within themselves where real depth, clarity, and presence reside. Stillness is not something you do, it is something you allow. It is the natural state of your being when you are no longer lost in identification with thought. The moment you stop trying to become something, stop projecting your sense of self into the future or clinging to the past, you begin to return to yourself, and in that return, stillness reveals itself. You don't create it, you uncover it. It was always there beneath the surface of your mental noise. But the mind is not comfortable with stillness. It doesn't know what to do with silence. It thrives on problems, plans, narratives. It wants to keep moving, keep solving, keep controlling. So when you first begin to touch stillness, it may feel uncomfortable. You may want to reach for your phone, turn on the TV, talk to someone, anything to fill the space. This discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something new is emerging. You are beginning to loosen the grip of conditioned thinking. Stillness is the space where awakening happens. Not in the future, not after you'd won more book or achieved one more goal. Awakening is not an event, it is a shift in how you relate to life. It is the recognition that what you have been seeking through thought and activity is already present when the mind becomes quiet. That silence between thoughts, that spacious awareness behind every experience, that is the beginning of real awakening. You don't have to force stillness. You can't force presence. What you can do is become aware of what gets in the way. The unconscious compulsion to think, to analyze, to judge. As you observe these patterns without resistance, without trying to fix them, something begins to shift, awareness grows, and with it, stillness arises. Not because you made it happen, but because you stopped interfering. Stillness does not mean withdrawal from life. It does not mean you stop speaking or act engaging. In fact, true stillness brings a new aliveness to everything you do. Your actions become more deliberate, more conscious. Your words carry more power because they are not just noise. They emerge from a deeper place, from presence, not from ego. In stillness, you are no longer reacting to life. You are responding from a place of clarity and peace. This stillness is not something separate from you. It is what you are beneath the noise of the mind. It is the spaciousness in which thoughts appear and disappear. And the more you become aware of it, the more it begins to inform your entire way of being. You may still experience challenges, but they no longer consume you. You may still have thoughts, but they no longer define you. There is space between you and the mind. That space is freedom. People often think awakening is a grand experience, a dramatic moment of realization, but in truth it is often subtle, quiet, and deeply intimate. It may begin with just a single breath fully felt, a single moment fully accepted. And from there, the space begins to expand. You start to realize that you are not your thoughts, not your emotions, not even your sense of self constructed by memory. You are the awareness in which all of it comes and goes. The more you rest in that awareness, the more stillness deepens. You begin to see how much of your suffering was created by resistance. Resistance to the present moment, to what is. Stillness is the opposite of resistance. It is full acceptance. Not passive resignation, but a deep alignment with now. And in that alignment, the burden of trying to control life lifts. You begin to trust more, to relax more, to open more. This doesn't mean your life becomes free of difficulties, but your relationship with those difficulties changes. You meet them with presence rather than fear. You begin to recognize that pain, discomfort, even confusion, all of it can be met with stillness. All of it can be held in the spacious awareness of now. And when it is, it transforms, not necessarily outwardly, but inwardly, which is where real change begins. Stillness is not the opposite of movement, it is the ground of all movement. When your life is rooted in stillness, your actions carry a different quality. They are no longer reactions, but expressions of presence. You may still have goals, but you are no longer defined by their outcome. You may still plan, but you are not lost in the future. You remain anchored in now, allowing life to unfold moment by moment. This is the beginning of living from depth rather than surface, from being rather than doing, from presence rather than projection. And it all begins with a return to stillness, a simple pause, a breath, a moment of silence in which you realize that nothing is missing, that this moment, just as it is enough. At a certain point on the path of awakening, you begin to see the difference between form and essence. Most of what people chase in life, the possessions, titles, accomplishments, relationships, belong to the realm of form. They're external, visible, measurable, and yet they are all impermanent. They come and go, change and shift. No matter how much you accumulate or achieve in the realm of form, it never truly satisfies the deeper longing within you, the longing for wholeness, for peace, for something real. Form is what the world tells you to value. From a young age, you are conditioned to believe that your identity is built upon what you do, what you have, what you look like, what others think of you. This becomes the structure of the ego, a fragile identity constructed entirely out of things that are not truly you. And because these things are subject to change, decay, or loss, you constantly feel the need to protect them, to prove yourself, to strive harder. It becomes exhausting, and yet it seems necessary because you've never known anything else. But when you begin to question the reality of form, when you start to sense that who you truly are must be deeper than these temporary structures, a shift begins. You start to turn inward, not to escape the world, but to look beneath the surface of it. And what you discover is that beyond all the layers of form, there is something formless within you, something untouched by time, by change, by circumstance. That formless essence is your true nature. It is the silent awareness that observes your thoughts, the spaciousness in which experiences arise, the presence that exists before, during, and after all activity. You cannot define it with words because it is not a thing. It does not belong to the world of form, but it gives life to all forms. Just as the ocean gives rise to waves, but is not limited to any one wave, your essence gives rise to your thoughts, emotions, and experiences, but is not limited by them. Most people live as if the wave is all there is. They believe they are the wave, the job, the name, the story, the personality. They fear the loss of it, and so they cling, compete, and suffer. But when you realize that you are the ocean, not just the wave, everything changes. You no longer seek your identity in things that can be lost. You rest in the deeper awareness that you are already whole, already complete. This doesn't mean that form becomes meaningless. It simply means that you no longer mistake it for your identity. You can still enjoy the beauty of form, a sunset, a relationship, a creative expression, but you don't cling to it. You know it will pass, and you are at peace with that, because your sense of self is no longer dependent on holding onto the wave. It is grounded in the stillness of the ocean. When you relate to others from this space of essence, rather than from ego or roles, something powerful happens. There is a deep recognition, not of the personality, but of the shared presence behind the mask. You begin to sense the formless in others, just as you have sensed it in yourself. And this recognition creates a field of peace, of compassion, of connection that goes beyond words. It is not something you have to try to achieve. It simply arises when the layers of form are no longer obscuring the light of presence. You begin to see that all forms, no matter how solid or important they appear, are temporary expressions. Your body, your thoughts, your emotions, your circumstances, all are in a constant state of flux. But that which is aware of these changes does not change. That still presence, that spacious awareness is who you truly are. And when you live from that place, you no longer resist the natural flow of life. You become aligned with it. There is great freedom in knowing that you are not the form, because then you no longer fear the death of form. Loss still happens, but it doesn't destroy you. Challenges still arise, but they don't define you. You begin to live with a quiet inner stability, not because life is always easy, but because you are no longer trying to find yourself in what is impermanent. Essence is not something you reach by striving, it is already here. It is revealed when the mental noise subsides, when the obsession with form softens. That is why stillness is so essential. In stillness, the illusion of form-based identity begins to fade, and what remains is the silent presence of being. It is not something you can grasp with the mind, but you can sense it. In fact, you've already had glimpses of it in moments of awe, in deep silence in the space between thoughts. These glimpses are invitations to go deeper, to live from essence rather than from form. To go beyond form is not to abandon life. It is to finally meet life as it is, without needing it to be different. You stop imposing your mental filters onto the world and begin to experience reality directly. A tree is no longer just a tree. It becomes a doorway into stillness. A face is no longer just a role. It becomes a mirror reflecting presence. Every ordinary moment becomes infused with the extraordinary when seen from the perspective of essence. And so, the shift is subtle yet profound. You begin to live from a place of presence. You act, but you are not consumed by your actions. You relate, but you are not trapped in identities. You plan, but you are not lost in the future. There is a deep simplicity in this way of being, a quiet joy that arises not from what happens, but from the space in which everything happens. When you live from essence, there is less fear, less grasping, less resistance. You become more open, more available to life. And in that openness, you discover that nothing needs to be added to this moment. Nothing needs to be fixed or improved before peace can arise. Peace is already here, in the stillness that is always present beneath the changing waves of form. There is something deeply misunderstood about suffering. For most people, suffering is seen purely as a problem, something to be fixed, avoided, or escaped as quickly as possible. It's viewed as an obstacle in the path, a disturbance to be eliminated. But what if suffering is not merely a mistake or misfortune, but a doorway? What if the discomfort, the pain, the inner turbulence is actually a signal, a moment of possibility that points beyond the limited self you've known? Life, in its deeper intelligence, often uses suffering as a catalyst. It shakes the foundation of who you think you are, not to punish, but to reveal. When everything is going according to plan, when the ego feels in control, there's little incentive to question anything. But when that structure begins to collapse, when life stops matching the mind's script, you are forced to stop and face what is. And in that confrontation, something hidden can begin to emerge. You may find yourself in a moment of loss or failure or heartbreak, and immediately the mind reacts. It labels it as wrong, resists what has happened, blames others or yourself, and tries to escape the discomfort. But what happens if just for a moment you stop resisting? What happens if, instead of turning away from the pain, you turn toward it, fully, consciously, with a quiet willingness to feel? This is not about indulging in suffering or creating drama around it. It is about bringing presence to it. Suffering, when met with full awareness, begins to transform. You realize that the pain itself is not the problem. It is the resistance to it that creates the real suffering. Pain arises, but the ego adds a story. This shouldn't be happening. I can't handle this. Why me? And the story becomes the suffering. But when you drop the story and simply feel what is present, something shifts. You become aware of a deeper space within you, a stillness that holds even the most intense emotion. Anger, grief, fear, these waves may rise, but there is a part of you that remains untouched. That part is awareness. And in moments of conscious suffering, you come to recognize it more clearly. Suffering can act as a fire that burns away the false. When you are stripped of the external things you relied on for identity, when your usual strategies no longer work, you are brought face to face with the essence of who you are. The ego cannot stand that space of not knowing, of vulnerability. But if you stay present, if you don't run or numb yourself, you begin to feel a quiet power emerging. Not the power of control, but the power of presence, the power of simply being with what is. This is why some of the most profound spiritual awakenings happen during times of great difficulty. It's not that suffering is required, but that it often becomes the breaking point for the ego, the moment when its hold is weakened enough for something deeper to shine through. The pain cracks open the shell, and the light begins to enter. You may have experienced a moment where everything fell apart, where the identity you had built no longer made sense, and the future looked uncertain, In that space, if you were still enough, you may have felt something unexpected, a strange sense of peace or clarity or even freedom, because when you no longer have anything to hold on to, you become open to what is beyond form. The key is conscious suffering. Most suffering is unconscious, reactive, noisy, filled with blame and resistance. But when suffering is met with awareness, with stillness, it becomes alchemical. It becomes transformative. You don't become bitter, you become softer, more open, more real. The suffering doesn't define you, it refines you. You don't have to seek out suffering or create it. Life will bring challenges as part of its natural unfolding. What matters is how you meet those moments. Do you collapse into them and identify with the pain? Or do you allow the pain to be there while remaining rooted in awareness? That's the choice point, the place where growth begins. Even physical pain, when met with awareness, changes in quality. There's the pain itself, and then there is the narrative the mind adds to it. If you remove the narrative, what remains is sensation. Intense, perhaps, but no longer overwhelming. Emotional pain follows the same pattern. When you feel sadness or fear without judgment, you realize that they are just movements of energy, and behind that movement is stillness. Behind the emotion is presence. As this becomes clearer, your relationship with suffering transforms. You no longer fear it in the same way. You don't welcome it, but you don't resist it either. You know that when it arises, it carries the potential to awaken something in you. And that knowing changes everything. You move through life with a deeper trust, not in the mind's plan, but in the unfolding intelligence of life itself. Suffering strips away the superficial. It forces you to let go of distractions, of illusions, of the things you thought you needed. And in that letting go, you become more real, more grounded, more connected to the present moment. You discover a depth that was always there waiting beneath the noise. Eventually, you come to see that peace is not the absence of pain, but the presence that holds all pain. Joy is not dependent on circumstances, but arises from the freedom of not needing anything to be different. Love is not an emotion, but a recognition of shared being. These are the gifts that conscious suffering can reveal. You may not always feel grateful for those moments while you're in them, but often when you look back, you see that they were turning points. Moments when the light broke through, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. Life brought you to the edge, and in surrendering, you found the ground beneath you was far more stable than you ever imagined. And so, suffering loses its power to define you. It becomes a teacher, not one you seek, but one you respect, because it brings you home, not to a better version of your story, but to the timeless awareness that has been here all along, quietly watching, patiently waiting. There's a fundamental misunderstanding in the way most people approach life. They believe that what they do is who they are, that their value is measured by their productivity, by how much they achieve, by how efficiently they move from one task to the next. This mindset creates an inner pressure, a constant need to be doing something, to be accomplishing, to be progressing. Life becomes a series of checkboxes, goals, deadlines. Even so-called rest is often just a brief pause to recharge before more doing resumes. But beneath this compulsion lies a deep truth, one that often remains unnoticed. Doing in of itself is not the problem. It's the state of consciousness from which doing arises that determines everything. There is a vast difference between doing that arises from ego and doing that arises from presence. When action is driven by ego, there is always some sense of lack behind it, a feeling that you are not enough unless you succeed, unless others approve, unless you accomplish more. There is an underlying restlessness, a tension that keeps pushing you forward, not because you're inspired, but because you're trying to become something. Trying to reach a future moment where, finally, you can relax and be at peace. But that moment never comes because the ego thrives on becoming. It never allows you to arrive. The doing never ends, but the being is never fully allowed. But when you step out of identification with thought, when you come into the present moment fully, you begin to notice something remarkable. There is a stillness that exists beneath all activity, a spacious awareness in which everything unfolds. And from that stillness, a new kind of doing can emerge, not one based on anxiety or ambition, but one that flows naturally, effortlessly from the aliveness of now. This is not passivity, it is not inaction. In fact, action rooted in presence is often far more effective, far more aligned than the constant busy work of the ego. When you are present, you are connected to a deeper intelligence than the thinking mind. You're no longer driven by fear or the need to prove anything. You act not to complete yourself, but as an expression of your completeness. The doing becomes a movement of life itself, unforced, spontaneous, often joyful. Imagine two people performing the same task, say, preparing a meal. One is rushing, thinking about the next thing, lost in inner commentary, irritated or anxious. The other is fully present, attentive to each motion, each scent, each sound. On the outside, the action might look the same, but energetically they are worlds apart. One is lost in doing, the other is rooted in being. And you can feel the difference in the energy they carry, in the quality of what they create, in the peace that radiates from them without a word. This is the invitation to shift from unconscious doing to conscious presence, to allow being to infuse your doing. You don't need to abandon your responsibilities or stop pursuing goals. What changes is your relationship to them. You are no longer doing in order to get somewhere. You are present with what is, and from that presence, right action flows. You begin to ask not, what do I need to achieve, but what is this moment asking of me? It's a completely different orientation, one rooted not in mental striving, but in still awareness. And often you'll find that the answer is far simpler, far clearer than what the mind could have produced. When you stop projecting yourself into the future or dragging the past into the now, life becomes lighter. Decisions are made not with overthinking, but with clarity. Creativity flows not from pressure, but from openness. This also means that you are no longer defined by what you do. Your worth is not measured by your output, your titles, or your resume. You are not the role you play. You are the awareness in which that role is played. You can be deeply engaged in your work, in your service, in your family, but without becoming trapped in identity. The action continues, but the strain disappears. The effort remains, but the tension fades. And even in the most ordinary tasks, there's a deep sense of peace, because you are no longer trying to get away from this moment. You are in it, fully. When doing arises from presence, you are in alignment with life. There is a flow, a harmony. Things seem to unfold with more ease, not because external conditions are always perfect, but because your inner state is no longer in resistance. You're not fighting against time, against yourself, against life. You're cooperating with it. And that shift changes everything. You'll still have goals, but you'll hold them lightly. You'll still make plans, but you won't lose yourself in them. You'll work hard when it's needed, but you won't collapse when things don't go as expected. Because your peace is no longer dependent on the outcome. It comes from the depth of your presence in the process. This is how being and doing can coexist, not as opposites, but as partners. Being is the foundation, doing is the expression. When you are rooted in being, your doing becomes a sacred act, no matter how mundane it may seem on the surface. You may be washing dishes, answering emails, tending to a child, but behind each motion is stillness, behind each task awareness, and in that awareness a deep joy begins to arise, not from what you're doing, but from the space in which the doing happens. So the question is not how much you can do, but how deeply you can be while doing. Can you feel the aliveness of this moment? Can you allow silence to be present in the middle of activity? Can you notice the breath, the body, the subtle stillness behind all movement? When you begin to live in this way, you discover that life is not a series of tasks to be completed, but a presence to be lived. And in that presence, the doing takes care of itself. There's a subtle but powerful shift that takes place when you begin to experience the present moment not as a means to an end, but as the end itself. For most people, life is always about getting somewhere else. This moment is treated like a stepping stone to the next, just something to get through, something to use so that some future moment can be better. It's as if now is never quite enough. The mind always has a condition. I'll be happy when I finish this task, when I get this result, when I reach that goal. But that future you imagine never truly arrives, because even when it does, the mind simply replaces it with another condition. The pattern continues endlessly, and in that pattern, life is missed. We are not really living, we are waiting for something better, something more. Waiting for a time when things finally settle, when we finally feel fulfilled, when everything is just right. But that time never quite comes, because we're always projecting ourselves into a future that exists only in thought. And in the process, we miss the only thing that is actually real, this moment. The present moment may seem ordinary. It may seem quiet, uneventful, even boring to the mind. But when you bring your full attention to it, when you truly enter the now, something extraordinary begins to reveal itself. There's a depth to this moment that cannot be seen when you're only using it to get somewhere else. Beneath the surface of what's happening lies a silent, living presence, a still aliveness that is always here, always available, but so often overlooked. You don't need to go somewhere special to find it. You don't need to have a profound experience or reach a particular state. All you need is to stop for a moment and become aware. Aware of the breath, aware of the sounds around you, aware of the sensation of your body, the space in the room, the silence behind the noise. These are not just sensory details. They are portals into presence. And when you give yourself fully to them, you begin to feel something shift. Time slows down, the mind quiets, and a sense of peace arises, not because anything has changed, but because you've entered into the simplicity of now. This is the miracle of presence, that everything you were seeking through your plans, your striving, your mental activity was already here, waiting. It didn't need to be created, it only needed to be noticed. The present moment doesn't need to be improved to be enough. It is enough simply because it is. And in recognizing that a burden lifts, you're no longer trying to force life to give you something. You're meeting it as it is, with openness, with attention, with acceptance. When you live like this, even the most ordinary moments take on a richness. Drinking a glass of water, listening to the wind, feeling the warmth of the sun on your skin, these things, so easily passed over, become deeply fulfilling. Not because they are spectacular, but because they are real. You're no longer elsewhere. You're here. And in that here-ness, you rediscover life itself, not as a concept, but as a direct, vivid experience. So much of our dissatisfaction comes from not being fully present. We think the problem is the situation, the people, the environment. But more often, the real issue is our absence. We're there in body, but not in awareness. Our minds are elsewhere, replaying the past, anticipating the future, lost in thought. And so we miss the beauty, the depth, the aliveness of the now. We miss the opportunity to experience peace, not as a result of external circumstances, but as the natural state of being that arises when we are truly present. This doesn't mean the present moment is always easy. Sometimes it brings pain, discomfort, uncertainty. But even then, when we meet it with awareness instead of resistance, we find that it is bearable, even transformative. We realize that our suffering doesn't come from what's happening, but from our mental resistance to what's happening, from our insistence that this moment should be different. But the moment is already here. It has already arrived. And when you stop arguing with it, you create space. In that space, peace becomes possible. Living in the now doesn't mean you stop making plans or thinking about the future. Simply means you don't lose yourself in it. You remain rooted in presence, even as you prepare for what's to come. You may remember the past, but you no longer dwell there. You bring your attention back again and again to this breath, this step, this word, this stillness. And as you do, you begin to realize something extraordinary. That what you were looking for in some imagined future has always been here, quietly waiting in the background of every moment. Not outside you, but within you. The peace, the clarity, the joy, they were never in the next achievement, the next success, the next event. They were here in the stillness of now, in the silent depth behind all experience. This is the foundation of a truly awakened life, one that is no longer driven by unconscious seeking, but grounded in presence. A life where each moment is valued not for what it can get you, but for what it is. And in this way, the smallest moments become sacred. They are no longer overlooked in the rush towards something else. They are honored, lived fully, and met with awareness. So the practice is simple, yet profound. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, bring your attention back. Feel the aliveness of this moment. Notice the breath, hear the sounds, sense the stillness. Let go of needing this moment to be any different. Be here, completely, because this moment, simple, quiet, and ordinary as it may seem, is the only place where life truly is.